John McMullen here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as the Eagles get a much-needed win, John. However, they do have a pulse, as you wrote, but even a win over the Cowboys next week, and you just pull even. I mean, it's still a long road ahead for this team.
Yeah, it is, but they're in it now, and they're going to be playing for first place next week. And even if you win the game, then you got to finish things off, which is going to be difficult because of the schedule. But I think from where they were a couple of weeks ago, that's obviously all you can ask for. And we talked about running the table on this three-game swing through the NFC East. They got 2 of the 3. They should have. This might have been the soft part of their schedule. Not might have been, it was. And, hey, you can only play who's in front of you, and the Eagles took care of business. So they do deserve credit for that.
They did, and they got the win last night. And look, I thought it was a pretty convincing win. You know, they took care of business. Second half really dominated. They grinded the game out. They ran the ball. They spread it around. I mean, that was the closest to a 2017 offense that I think I've seen all year.
Well, I would agree. They still left too much on the field for my liking. There were a number of plays, particularly with Carson Wentz. Obviously, the red zone interception, but there was also a miss of Nelson Agholor on a crossing pattern that would have went for long yardage. He badly missed Dallas Goedert on the screen. So there's still some issues where they can certainly be more effective. But that team was dead in the water. So, I mean, you do have to temper your enthusiasm. I mean, they weren't even look, they came into the game with issues with a backup quarterback and backup guards, and then they lost the quarterback and the guards. So by the time the second half came around, I mean, they couldn't do anything at an NFL level. So, like I said, the good part is you take care of business, but you also have to temper the enthusiasm and realize the Redskins were sort of like the Eagles were going into New Orleans because of the injury situation. That's how bad it was for them. So that part, I temper, as I said, my enthusiasm.
Yeah, I know. You get the win against a banged-up team, a much-needed win, obviously, you said, to keep the pulse going. But they were finally able to get Golden Tate going in the game. It finally felt like, okay, maybe this offense can carry it from one week to the next week. How were they able to get Tate going?
Well, I don't think they were. I think he got going through the extending of the plays and the improvised stuff. Actually, it was interesting. Golden Tate, they actually scaled him back. He played less when you look at his reps. Now he was more effective, and the 2 big plays were improvised. And that was where Carson Wentz sort of excelled, and that kind of reminded you a little bit of 2017, his ability to extend plays, get outside the pocket. Hopefully that sort of garners some confidence between the 2 of them, and they can keep moving on from there. I also hope it opens the coaching staff's eyes. And this is not the time to scale back the playing time for Golden Tate. And that's what they did, which struck me as a little bit strange.
Yeah, and I know. But I thought Agholor, though, was at least involved last night. Like, I think Agholor was an underrated piece of that team last year. Like, he would make big plays. I mean, he just seemed to always be popping up.
He does, but he's not consistent. And look, there was the one play where Carson missed him. That's not his fault. But you look at the effectiveness of Golden Tate, you look at 7 receptions on 7 targets, a touchdown, a 2-point conversion. There's just something about guys who are playmakers. And sometimes you can't put your thumb on it. Nelson can't do that. The consistency is not there. Mm-hmm. And I still think the Eagles are forcing the issue with him for whatever reason. And I'll be honest, I don't agree with it. Now, when you're playing 11 personnel and you put them outside, which is what they're doing, that's fine. But I'm not scaling back Golden Tate's reps for the sake of Nelson Agholor, and that's what the Eagles are doing. I don't agree with that.
No, and I agree that they shouldn't be forcing Agholor out there. Now, he had 4 catches, 8 targets last night, but I felt like his catches were meaningful catches. Like they were in not huge shots, but like last year it felt like he was getting first down catches and always catching the ball, reversing and getting upfield. Like when he caught the ball, it seemed like good things happened. And last night was the first time, like when he caught the ball, it seemed like it was a meaningful result.
Well, I mean, the guy's got tremendous athleticism, and no one's going to argue that. And there are times when it looks really, really good. And there's no doubt last season he was a lot better than he was this season. So there are times when and it's, sort of like promise versus production. You get all excited and say, wow, if this guy can just get consistent, we really got a big-time playmaker here. I think the sample size, I know the sample size is large enough to make the decision that it's never going to be like that with this guy. It just isn't. And I think the Eagles have to come to that conclusion. That's not to say he can't help you or he shouldn't be a part of the offense, because he certainly should. But I don't agree with the way the Eagles are using Golden Tate, and that's because they want Agholor on the field. I'm never going to agree with that.
Yeah, no, I think, look, if they're using Agholor at the expense of getting Tate on the field, that's just short-sighted for what you gave up to get him.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the reps yesterday, Tate was under 50%, and Agholor was right up with Alshon Jeffrey. Now, again, that's because when they're playing 12 personnel, when they play 2 tight ends, it's generally Jeffrey and Agholor on the field. So he's getting more opportunities than Golden Tate. And look, there's been some hiccups and the midseason pickup, and that's all understandable, the chemistry. But it's time to put that in the rearview mirror. And I think you saw that yesterday, because even though Nelson's on the field, even though he made some plays, Golden Tate's on the field far less, and he's making more plays.
What is going on with Alshon? 3 for 36. I mean, he seemed like he was off the injury, came into this season, and kind of made an immediate impact. He's been almost invisible, it seems like.
Well, he made a big play against the Giants. Remember, the catch and run sort of got that game-winning drive started. In the game against New York. That was a big play. But yeah, when he first came back from the injury, he was really effective, and things have been scaled back. And obviously there's that ESPN report from Josina Anderson. So everybody's putting two and two together there. That said, the player said the offense was too Zach Ertz centric, too much targeting of Zach Ertz. Everybody think that's Alshon. I don't know if it is. I don't know if that's fair. Traditionally, I mean, that's been her go-to guy in the Eagles locker room. That's why people go in that direction. Either way, I mean, the ball's going to Zach Ertz because he's always open. I can't fault a guy for playing at a high level like Zach Ertz. And the Eagles generally don't win and aren't as successful when you see those big 14-catch games. But, again, that's sort of like the chicken and the egg. I mean, those are the games the Eagles are behind in. And Zach's the one getting open when they're trying to come back and throwing the football. You saw yesterday. The effectiveness is still there as far as targets and connections, whether the Eagles win or lose with Zach Ertz. So I don't think that's going to stop. And I don't think Alshon's been playing as well the past few weeks. So sometimes you got to look in the mirror.
John, what are your thoughts on Darren Sproles back into this offense last night, and his hopefully big impact moving forward. And what do you thought about his impact last night returning onto the field?
Well, Doug was true to his word, mixed him in very little. I think he played 9 snaps, but he had the big, obviously the big touchdown run where Jason Kelce deserves a lot of credit. He was unbelievable on that run. Yeah, and it'll continue to increase. I think it helps on the punt return game. That's pretty obvious. And I think as it gets more and more comfortable and we start to get down the stretch, I think you're going to see more of Darren. But we also have to enter in the equation that Corey Clement has all of a sudden picked it up. And he was very effective in the screen game. So now you got 3 guys because Josh Adams is going to be the main back. So it'll be interesting. But I talk all the time, Doug Peterson loves Darren Sproles as a player, and that has not changed.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about those screens we saw last night from the Eagles offense. Is that just a one-game kind of chess piece move from Doug to switch it up and throw the Redskins off maybe a little bit, or is that something that he could go back to as the season goes on here down the stretch?
No, the Eagles love the screen game. They were very effective against the Giants as well. I think a lot of it is just the offensive line starting to gel a little bit more, starting to get healthier. That's part of it. Corey's playing a little bit better. That's part of it. And now that Darren's in it, I think you have more of a threat in that screen game as he continues to play more. So, no, I think that's going to be a big part of the Eagles' offense. It always is.
Yeah, John McMullen's with us. Real quick, some things to clean up today. Jernigan, he never ended up making it to the field last night. Precautionary. But was that something with that back, or do they anticipate him being ready for Dallas? Because, Zeke Elliott, they could use all the help they can get at that position.
Yeah, Doug said today they expect him to play against the Cowboys, so that's good news. He had back spasms, so it's not as bad as it could have been. Obviously, when you hear back, you immediately go to that cervical fusion. But he is supposed to be back against the Cowboys. It will help. But remember, he's also sort of like the defensive version of Darren Sproles. He played, I think, 19 snaps against the Giants. They didn't give him a ton of work. I don't think he's going to get a ton of work against the Cowboys as well. So they're sort of just mixing him back in. But he's definitely helpful when he's out there.
Yeah, and then Jason Peters, it happened right at the end of that game. You saw the play on TV where he kind of got rolled up into Jason Kelce there. And today, Doug said he got rolled up. He's going to be okay. He's day-to-day. He should be fine. He should be fine. However, Jason Peters is an older guy. Sometimes those things the next day get you.
Yeah, sometimes they do. And the Eagles are scaling things back this week. They're not even going to practice on Wednesday. They're going to have more of a walkthrough. So they're only going to have practice on Thursday and Friday. I wouldn't be surprised if Jason Peters doesn't practice at all this week, and he'll show up on Sunday. The guy's pretty amazing. Torn bicep, quad, what have you. I think he's going to play against the Cowboys. I don't think he's going to practice much, if at all, this week. But, yeah, the Eagles expect him to be out there.
And Kelce, by the way, had a good night. I thought 2 underrated plays, just, random. The Kelce play, obviously, he for the Sproles touchdown, just a great job showing his versatility, the ability to get out in front. But I thought there was a play in the game, and I don't even remember what it resulted in. But Clement, man, he stepped in there and had a block. Just stepped in there, boom, made a block, and, Wentz ended up getting a big completion there. But, little things like this that they weren't doing earlier in the year, like all these little things, the little things, John, seem to be becoming more noticeable.
Well, yeah, I think they're playing better, but I think this is a test because I think, as I said, this was the easiest portion of the schedule. So you're going to look better against a Redskins team down to its third cornerback and a quarterback and its fifth and 6th offensive guards. You should look good. You should look better. And I compared it to the Saints game and the fact that once Mark Sanchez comes in the game, that the Redskins know the game is over. I mean, they know they don't have a chance. So that plays on the opposition's psyche, just like it happened in New Orleans with the Eagles in the other direction. And I mentioned that week, it wasn't as bad as you thought, not on that particular day, but long term, because the Eagles were going to be able to recover a little bit when they got healthier in the secondary, and that's exactly what has happened. So, look, get excited. They're in a first-place game. It didn't look good a couple of weeks ago, and now they have an opportunity, but this is going to be a much more difficult opponent who's got a really good defense. They've improved offensively since Amari Cooper's gotten there. And this will be a truer test to see if the Eagles are really on the right track or if they just took advantage of a couple bad opponents.
Yeah, well, real quick, and we were talking about this a lot. You know, we talked a little bit yesterday, the percentages and the wild card and yada, yada. Again, the frustration is even if you beat Dallas, you've only pulled into a tie with – now, you would be ahead of them because your division record is better than theirs, but – L.A., Houston, Washington, much more daunting than Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, and New York. So just pulling to a tie with them, you still have a long way to sled going forward here. So,
well, yeah, that's true. I mean, because the Eagles have – look, there's no way around it. I mean, the Rams and Houston are going to be difficult. But, look, who knows what happens at that point. Maybe Houston has everything locked up. Maybe they rest some players. Probably going to be playing for seeding, so it might not happen. But either way, Washington on the road, that looked difficult. That's no longer difficult in Week 17, so that's a positive. And Indianapolis is better than people think. And Tampa Bay can jump up and hurt you because they can move the ball offensively. So we talk about it all the time, the NFL. I mean, you look at things on paper and you say, Team A is going to beat Team B. And I talked about it on Countdown to Kickoff before the game last night. It's not who you play, it's when you play them. The Redskins were feeling pretty good about themselves a number of weeks ago. And then Alex Smith breaks his leg. And then Colt McCoy, they're feeling a little less good. And then he breaks his leg. And now they have nothing. That's how quickly things change in the NFL. Not saying that stuff's going to happen to the Cowboys, but you have to wait and see. These games are not easy, especially if you suffer a couple bad injuries at an important position.
Yeah. Well, especially as we're having this conversation on this day, a lot of things not feeling super. That 27% feels about accurate. You know what I'm saying? Like, it still feels like it is still going to be very difficult. And I said yesterday, I know the percentages don't back wild card, but I almost feel better of Minnesota finishing 6 or 7, 8-1. Or Carolina finishing 7-9 than I do going through the division way.
Well, I mean, if you want to look at it from a perspective of we just said, I mean, are the Eagles going to beat the Rams in Houston? Probably people in Carolina are hoping that's not going to happen. So even if the Eagles beat the Cowboys and beat the Redskins, well, that gets them only to 8 wins. And at that point, you would have to be at 7. But as Minnesota, they might lose to Seattle. They probably will lose to Seattle.
Yeah, we got a Seattle-Minnesota game this weekend. You got to root for Seattle, have them kind of take the 5 seed. I mean, if you're Philly right now, you're looking at the potential of a 4 or 6 seed. That's probably your 2 best-case scenarios, unless you ran the table and somehow jumped over Chicago.
But the difficult part is, with Carolina and Minnesota, they have the tiebreakers.
Yeah. Well, right. So, I'm thinking if the Eagles are a 8-8 wild card team, Your best shot is for
well,
Carolina.
you would have to, but that's what I'm saying. You're talking about the Vikings losing to Detroit and Miami. That probably isn't going to happen. So, they're probably low cases 8 wins, and that means the Eagles got to beat the Rams or the Texans. They got to win one of those games, and if they win one of those games, and this is the reason the wild card is so low, that means they're going to win the division because they will have beaten Dallas. They will have won that game. They will have beaten Washington.
Yeah,
and they're going to win the division most likely. So that's why the wild card is so low.
He's John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter, and Washington now all banged up, 6-6. They don't seem to be a factor. We know it seemingly is a 2-team race down the stretch. This week's game with Dallas, obviously, we'll dive into more. But unfortunate last night for McCoy, breaks his leg. They go to Sanchez. So it really felt like the end of the Washington season there.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to pick up somebody off the street to compete with Mark Sanchez at quarterback. Remember, they carried 2 quarterbacks. So they just brought in Mark Sanchez recently. Once Alex Smith went down, they didn't have a third quarterback on the roster. So, their season is done because you can't get a quarterback up to speed this late in the season. And obviously, not only do you need to get that quarterback up to speed, but it's not a talented guy because he's on the street. And if he had any talent, he wouldn't be on the street.
Poor Washington. Yeah. All right, we'll have plenty more on the Eagles, and Dallas is a monster game in Big D. That's another part of this. The game is in Dallas. They've already beaten you in your building. So there's so many different storylines leading into this one. We'll have it all week long with John McMullen here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, John, you the man.
All right, thanks, guys.